Hey, what up, y'all? Mr. Cruz here, the latest teacher you never had, back with another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking all about automation and remote override. I know you guys probably have your ideas or your specific parameters or your favorite parameters that you love to automate mostly all the time. But today I'm going to be showing you some of the obscure ones, some of the ones that you probably didn't know you could automate and that you might be able to or might want to try out. But also we're going to talk about remote override. So remote override is different from automation in the sense that remote override can't be recorded into your session, but it pretty much functions the same way that automation does. So I use remote override for certain reasons, especially when I'm mixing for like a utility. It's essentially a tool that will help me to mix better or to bounce from tracks back and forth a lot easier. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. So for starters, we're going to start with our master fader. Not our master fader, but our master bus. So I'm going to go here to my master bus. And in my master bus, some of the things that I can automate are this right here, my channel select. So you can see here that we have edit remote override, and you can't see it, but on my MIDI controller, I am going to bam, there we go. On my MIDI controller, you saw that I can I picked a knob that'll allow me to change this. So now if we look over here at our channel select, now you'll see this little red dot move up and down, right? Whoa, bam. See, and it allows me to select a certain channel. So the application for this could be if you wanted to route your reference track to a different output, right? So right now, all of my things are going to this output, but if I wanted to route my reference track to this output right here to 3 and 4, that will allow me to bypass the master section. So that way, any effects or anything that I put into my master bus or as I'm moving the fader up and down, it's not going to be impacted. The volume is not going to be impacted by the by anything that's in my master bus or in my mix channel. So that's a good one. Another thing that you can do is also you can remote override. Actually, that's not an automation. That's a remote override. This one, you can also remote override the reset button. So I'm going to hit a pad here on my controller. So when I'm mixing, the way that I use this is I'll press play because there's certain when I'm finished with a project and I'm ready to bounce it, there's certain files that I have for certain reasons. So if it's a version of the beat that I want to sell, well, I don't want that to have no headroom, so I have to turn it down. So what I'll do is I'll press play, and I'm gonna press play here. So we see that is loud, right? And that there's no headroom. So this is a version of the beat that I would use if I'm just putting it on a YouTube video that I want it to be loud enough for people to hear. So this is kind of like a preview or a taste of it. So essentially what I'll do then is I will take my volume, my master bus volume, so let's go up here. I'm only going to focus on the submix for now, but just to kind of give you the example. So I'm going to press play on my project or my session, and I'm going to turn my volume down. And again, I'm only using this as a reference or as just to kind of show you what I mean. And I'm going to turn this down, but I'm going to constantly hit my reset button that I've used as a remote override to make sure that my volume is going down. All right, so let's check this out. All right, so that seems about right. And of course, I don't have my you hear that, hey yo, Mr. Cruz. That's because my tag is not routed to anything else. But there you go. So now I saw that it's kind of peaking around -8. So that's a version that I would bounce out and that I would send. Oh my gosh, there's my son. That's a version that I would bounce out and send to a client or a customer. All right, and next up we have our reference track. So my reference track is another remote override. I realized that this is video about automation. I haven't talked about automation yet. I will though. Is my reference track. So my reference track, the way that I have my reference track routed is I have used a splitter to join with what's going to my master bus, but it essentially is bypassing anything that's in the master bus. So with my reference track, what I have here is I am going to remote override the solo button. Yes. All right. So because I have it muted now, when I press play, you're not going to hear the reference track. Let me see if I can open up the sequencer so we can see. This is my reference track down here. So when I hit play on my my session, and when I hit the remote override to solo it, it's only going to hear, you're only going to be able to hear my reference track. So this allows me when I'm mixing, especially early on when I'm trying to figure out the low end, this allows me to bounce back and forth between the two really quickly to be able to gauge how close I am to matching the level of my reference track. So I'm going to show you here. So that's my reference track. There's my original track, reference track, original track. Bring the volume back up. Reference track, original track. So again, that just allows me to bounce back and forth. And again, that's probably something that you already use or that you already know. But now let's get into some of the other cooler stuff. So we're gonna jump to our mixer, our mixer strip, our mixing channels. So here, one of the things that you can use is you can remote override the width. So it's good practice, or at least you probably already heard that it's good practice to mix your tracks in mono, because if you mix your tracks in mono and you can get it to sound good in mono, then it's going to sound amazing when it's in stereo, right? So what I'll do is I'll remote override. Boom. Actually, instead of that one, we're going to cancel that. I'm gonna remote override it with a pad. So essentially with a button or with a one of the keys. So that way it does, as you can see right here, it's going to just jump between mono and between stereo. So this is what I'll do, especially when I'm mixing in the beginning, is that I'll convert everything to mono and then I'll mix it to the way that I like it. And then I will, at some point in time, I will hit my key or my pad to turn everything into stereo so that I can hear everything nice and loud and clear. Now to the first automation. We're going to go up here to the input, and in input, this button right here, invert phase, you can automate this button. So if you're using live recordings, this is super useful, especially if you're recording something like drums where you're expecting the drummer to play the same rhythm or the same pattern over again, and if you are recording using only one mic. So with that, you might come across an instance where, all right, you're more than likely going to be using the invert phase button if you're recording drummer, or if you're recording a live drum set using only one mic. With this, you can, let's say at one point in time you want to take out or you want to lower the hi-hat, so instead of muting it, you can automate the invert phase so that you still keep that same level of dynamics between the rest of the drum kit or whichever your overhead or whatever you're using, and not lose any of the quality or the punch that you already have there. So if you automate the invert phase, you can mute one. That's another option. You can mute it, or you can just automate the invert phase, and that'll kind of eliminate the phase option that you have when you encounter recording a drum set with one mic, because you will more than likely get phase issues. Now, next up we have our instruments. So in our instruments, this one's really dope. But what I have found is that it doesn't work for some, but it works. It doesn't work for all of them, but it works for some. So you have your typical pitch bend wheel and your mod wheel. So let me see if I can get this to show up as I am moving my thing. All right, yep. So my pitch bend wheel and my mod wheel. All right, on our NNXT and our Kong, I know it does not work, but there's a reason for it. Well, first I'm going to show you one that does work. So in my Dr. Octorex, when I select it and make sure that my thing is working, okay, you have this button or this parameter down here. It says the pitch bend range. So the pitch bend range tells me how far this pitch bend wheel is going to travel theoretically on a keyboard when I move it all the way up or all the way down. So if it's set to 7, that means when I push it all the way up, it's going to travel 7 different keys, 7 different, not octaves, 7 different semitones. Essentially, that means that it's going to travel an octave. So if I push it all the way up, it's going to go from whatever octave I already have it set to, 1 octave higher. If I push it down, it's going to go to 1 octave lower. You can automate this button right here. So you can automate how much range you're going to have. Let me say here. So over here on this side is where you would have your default parameter. So since it's set to 7, it's already going to stay at 7 no matter where. So if I wanted to move it to, all right, at this point it's going to move to 9, at this point it's going to move to 18. You can automate that. So especially if you're doing something like transitions, if you're making your own transitions or your own effects, that's something that you could utilize pretty frequently. So that one's dope. And again, that works on some of the racks, but it doesn't work on all of them. For example, it does not work on the NNXT. I'm sorry, it doesn't work on the Kong Drum Designer. And it's probably because each one of these pads has its own you can set your own pitch bend range for each of those, and the same thing on our NNXT. On this one, I kind of get it more because you can deal with so many different samples, and you wouldn't be able to automate every single sample that you're using as far as the pitch bend range. All right, lastly, we have our transport channel down here, our transport strip. All right, so down here, some of the things you can automate is you can actually remote override your tap tempo. So I know most of us probably sit here and do this. We click 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. But you can remote override, and I'm going to set that to one of my pads. And now I can tap on my pad, and you'll see the numbers changing because I'm tapping on my pad. So that's a little bit of a simpler way to do that. You can also automate this right here, your metronome and your pre-counter. But again, that's if you know the hotkeys for that, you're not really going to use that very often. But you can also automate your time signature. So this is pretty genre specific. So if you're dealing with a specific genre that uses a different time signature than the typical, the average 4/4, then you can automate to kind of be a little bit experimental with what you're doing. Me as a hip hop producer, I don't think I have ever made something that used a different time signature. I probably should experiment with that, but I have not done that to date. And then also over here, you can also remote override your quantized record. So your quantized record, let's say if you're trying to bounce between, okay, I want to do my drums quantized, but I want my melody to not be quantized, then you can you can remote override that to change it to something different. So there is what we have. Now I know I kind of feel I'm gonna have to change the name of this because there's really very little automation that we're going over, but you can but a lot of it is more remote override. So my bad for the misleading title. But there you go. Hopefully that's something you guys learn. Hopefully something you guys can use in the future as you're creating your own stuff. Let me know in the comments below if you learned anything, if any of this stuff was new to you, or even if you knew most of the stuff that I went over here today. All right, it's your boy Mr. Cruz out.